of our protection for our wildlife and our environment. So I believe we need really strong pieces of policy and legislation that starts at the top and then has to come down. Currently, the federal government offsets koala issues, environmental issues, water issues, all of this back down to state, and then state does the same thing back down to council. So we need to be holding our federal senators and our MPs to a high standard, and therefore that means that they then need to hold their state representatives and then their council to the same high standard. We are not going to see a protection of this environment and our native wildlife unless federal government does better at protecting this for us.
Thank you. Alrighty, this is going to be the last question. This lady, thank you very much. You've waited very patiently.
My name's Annemieke. I've got a question which actually is for the whole panel. When people work, they pay their taxes, they get certain benefits. Why do politicians, once they finish their term in politics, get so many perks that finish when the ordinary people, when they finish their jobs, they lose their perks? Why should politicians continue to have free travel? They should continue to have also, staff that they can still work, that still works for them. Why do we still have to pay for politicians once they have finished in Parliament?
I think we can all agree that's the best question tonight. Thank you for waiting. Darren.
I'm not in Parliament yet. But yeah, I can't answer that. That's the system that we've got currently, and
It doesn't agree with your morals.
Just 1 second. Can Darren answer, please?
I'm more than happy to let
No, carry on.
Just to explain how the
Andrew,
system works.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Darren, carry on, please.
Oh, okay. Happy to hear what the actual status quo is, but yeah, that's the system that's currently there now, and I suppose once we get in, vote for us, and I'll definitely give it a review once we're there for sure.
Gabe,
So
we'll get to you, Andrew.
Sleep at night collecting that benefits, won't you? What's that?
No,
We'll
look,
pass it around. We'll all answer. Thank you. Gabe.
federal politicians should get the same superannuation package as any other federal public servant, and that's the status quo.
Thank you, Andrew.
There's an email from a gentleman called Dr. Dale Kerwin that's basically been running around Australia since 2011 stating what you've just said. All of those payments were ceased in 2004 between John Howard and Mark Latham, and the only existing politicians at that time that were grandfathered, and there's almost none of them left. So the only politician that gets a payment after they leave, apart from a separation payment of 1 month for every term they've done, up to 3, as I understand, which is basically a long service payment while they just adjust to life after politics, so it's a long service payment, is the Prime Minister. Okay, so I don't know what your views are on whether we'd like Prime Ministers earning their money on speaking tours and stuff like that, but they do get assistance with an office, assistance with a secretary after they've been a Prime Minister. I support that because I think Prime Ministers have a unique position. But the premise of your question, it stopped before I was even elected, and now we just get superannuation at a higher rate than the minimum, but similar to other equally paid public servants, judges, commissioners and others. It's higher, but hey, I did a job long before I was in politics that was paid way better than what I get now. It's not the biggest thing in the world to me. I do this job because I love it. And yes, the superannuation is slightly higher than an entry-level worker, but they can run for politics, get elected and have the same superannuation as me.
Thank you. Emerald?
I guess the short answer is that they shouldn't. And aside from completely scrapping politicians' pensions, I think that the other thing that we need to crack down on is the revolving door between politicians and lobbyists, where we may not see an explicit awarding of funds to politicians after they leave Parliament, but we sure do see them getting a lot of cushy jobs in the industries that they've helped in lobbying industries that they may have helped during Parliament.
Thank you, Shane.
It's a policy of the United Australia Party to end the age of entitlements of retired politicians. Now, I can't tell you how much that is, what they get or what perks they get, but we all hear stories of like Bromley Bishop earning $300,000 a year, car, driver, office with staff. I don't know. I'm not down. Maybe when I get down there, I'll release the documents so everyone can see how much they do get. That might be a problem. But, yeah.
It's the same superannuation as any other federal.
Well, I don't know. Look, I don't know how it works.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, well, okay.
The former Prime Ministers are also advised to the job. That's also another point.
Well, I'm not going to answer it. Look,
We'll pass that over to Karen, mate.
Well, I own a doggy daycare business, so that's probably where I'll go back to afterwards and hang with all the dogs, and it will probably be a nice break probably from the politics of Senate. But to answer your question, I absolutely believe that the laws that have been put in place should remain in place, and yeah, they don't deserve anything after their job. I believe I'm of the personal opinion that the Prime Minister I think does hold a very specific role, so potentially that should be different than any other MP or senator, but from my perspective, I absolutely agree that there shouldn't be any further monetary involvement, and I completely agree with the Greens on the lobbyist comment.
Brandon?
Politicians are public servants, and it seems that far too many politicians have forgotten that fact. So if the Pirate Party is elected, we would certainly be reviewing the rules, and once I leave politics, I'll be going back to the law, which is not which most people think is a glamorous and well-paying job. My job was not well-paying. I was a community lawyer for 30 years. There's no money in that.
Lyle?
I think Andrew said it pretty well, and it's disappointing that the myth has been perpetuated by some of the panellists, and I mean that with the greatest respect. And with respect to you, ma'am, I was well aware that in 2004 the arrangements changed, and it's right that they did change. So I think we've got to be careful that we don't just create a folklore that somehow all politicians are on the take. Yes, we should rightly hold them to account, but we get the government that we deserve, and I think the reason why Canberra is so broken and why many of us are unhappy with Canberra is perhaps because as Australians it might even be partly our fault. We are a very apathetic country, and present company accepted, because you've all come out tonight to a community forum, which I wish every Australian would do in the lead up to this election, because you won't get informed through social media or the mainstream media. But we have to resist the tendency to become cynical. And I think the way to do that is for more of us to participate in the democracy and to be well informed, and then to hold politicians to account based on the facts, not based on emails and things that might circulate.
Thank you. Okay, just one moment. I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of the Redlands City Mayor, Karen Williams. And she, in fact, has a question. Karen.
Thanks, Damien, and well done tonight. First time in Redlands, and I've been around for 1.5 decades in this role of one description or another. To get Senate representatives here is great, so congratulations, because that's not very often that we get to hear that debate from our senators. Which is a great segue, because last week in the State Parliament, and I appreciate that we don't have any state representatives here, but we have talked about all 3 levels of government this evening, and various roles which kind of get moulded and segue into other levels of government. But last week in the state government there was a bill that was tabled in regards to compulsory preferential voting, which is now going to be imposed by the state government on local government across the board here in Queensland. Now, I acknowledge that, as we have some Senate candidates here, that in fact you can be elected to the Senate with less than 24 votes. So I guess I'd like to hear from everyone sitting at the table in regards to local government now looking down the barrel of compulsory preferential voting. And I encourage you that, like your vote to count, your one vote to count, to make sure you're aware of what's happening at the state level and perhaps make your views known. Because in my view, when I speak to people in this city, and I've lived here most of my life, if not all of it, people actually like their votes to count and they don't actually like to pass it on to other people. So I'm saying hands off our votes, and I'd like to know from each of you around the table how you feel about CPV and what you will do, potentially, to make sure that local government can continue to be an independent representative of the people of this city of Redlands.
Thank you, Mayor. Gab?
Well, compulsory voting of any nature is an absolute abrogation of our rights to say we're not interested in what you're selling.
Andrew?
Look, there's been huge amounts of games played by state Labor. That's why they're not here tonight. They don't want to answer questions. I support you fully.
Excuse me. Can Andrew speak?
You're an organiser with the candidate. I just asked you to
No,
be
he's not an
quiet.
organiser.
Yes, you are. He
No, he's
is.
not.
No,
No, he's
I know
not.
he is.
Carry on.
Labor has continually in Queensland played with the voting system. So back in the old days when Peter Beattie wanted to separate Liberal and National as two parties, he changed from preferential voting to vote one, Peter Beattie, because he knew that the Liberal voters would lose all the Nationals, vice versa. Then Anastasia Palaszczuk came in and said, there's so many Green votes we're missing out on in the city. Let's flip it back again. So she did. And this political opportunism underpins exactly what Karen is talking about. You may not even understand this change. It's being done to help Labor win the next state election. It's the third time they've fiddled with our voting system to help themselves, not you.
Thank you.
Very much like how the Liberal Party fiddled with the Senate voting system last election.
Okay.
You've got a good point.
Darren?
I totally agree with what you're saying, where people should have their own choice if they wish to vote one or they wish to vote for other parties in their ballot paper. They should have, be able to make that decision for themselves. They shouldn't be forced to vote for a party that they're not voting for, that they don't want in.
Emerald?
Yeah, I did want to just point out at the outset that the comment in relation to a certain amount of votes being needed in the Senate is not a quirk that's related to preferential voting. It's related to the proportional representational system. But I think that's one of the problems with our current system, is that there's a lot of misinformation that's spread about preferential voting, and it is complicated, and I think that it should be taught in schools, especially when we have a compulsory voting system. And I think that it should be taught so that people are not having to buy the myth that's sold by the major parties in particular, and a lot of media outlets, that parties are just giving your preferences away, that someone is giving your preferences to someone. You have complete control over where your vote goes. And that's why our voting system is the envy of the developed world, because exactly as Karen said, we want our vote to count. And if we look at systems like the US, where they have first past the post, where it's not preferential, a lot of people have their vote simply not count because they voted for a party that doesn't have a complete majority. And especially when we look at our current system, I think a lot of people are pretty pissed off and pretty disappointed with the way things have been going with the major parties. And I think that they have a right to be able to vote for a minor party should they wish, and still have their vote be counted at the end of the day. And that's what preferential voting gives you. And I think that that's why, it's essential that they have that opportunity to have their vote counted at the end of the day. And if anyone has any questions about preferential voting, it's a bit of a pet, I'm clearly pretty passionate about educating people about it, because it frustrates me that a lot of people don't understand just how powerful their vote can be with that. So feel free to ask me.
Thank you. Shane?
I kind of like the French system. You know how our country has been driven over the last God knows how many decades with the two-party system, and where it's driven us to the ground. We don't own nothing. Only our small businesses are the last bastions in our country that has any formal grip. Everything else is owned by foreign corporations. With the preferential voting, little minor parties like anyone who wants to stand up and represent the people of this country wouldn't have no chance of getting elected. That is wrong. We'd just have, yeah, right, good. We'd just have the two-party preferred system and we'd have the same stuff. Vote for the same idiocy and we get the same idiocy. Let's push for some change. Like I said, I like the French system. If we have 30 or 40 parties sitting in Parliament, so be it. We all can engage and contribute and bring our ideas and make a great nation. It's simple. The two-party preferred system's not doing that for us. It's not working for us. It's not helping me. I don't know about you guys.
We need to gang up against the Labor.
Karen.
Thank you for the question, Thank you for the question, Karen. So firstly, it is a very complicated system. I'm finding it very frustrating talking on my campaign trail to people who don't understand preferential voting, especially when it comes to the Senate. The Senate was formed as our democratic hub to discuss and have everyone to have a discussion from different points of view. That's currently not what Senate is doing. There's currently no voice for the animals and, in my opinion, the environment that is strong enough and looking at the facts. So I want to inform and educate people about preferential voting and why it's important to vote for who you really align with. You don't need to worry about the majorities, especially when it comes to Senate. We want a voice for everyone in there. That's democracy. So from my perspective, it's simple. If you want protection for our animals and the environment, you vote one for the Animal Justice Party and then you make your own preferences after that. No one is dictating to you how you do that. So I think preferential voting, if educated enough and people understanding it enough, I think works okay, but people feel a lot of pressure in labelling how their party is doing it, and that's just not the case. You vote one for the party that aligns with you, and then you make your preferences after that based on you, not what the party wants you to do.
Thank you. Brandon?
I think it was Winston Churchill who said democracy is the worst form of government in the world, it's just better than all the others. It's the same with compulsory preferential voting. It's probably not the best voting system in the world, but it is better than all the others. First past the post voting has been shown not to work very well in the US and the UK. We've seen disastrous results from that. To explain how this voting system would work, I mean, even the AEC can't explain it properly to people. There was a press conference earlier this week with the commissioner of the AEC who just could not explain it. If you want preferential voting explained, I want you to go to a website. It's called chickennation.com. Yes. I'm not kidding. A bunch of Australian animals will explain to you how the voting system in this country works. It's amazing. I'll get Damien to put it on the event website after tonight, because that will explain everything. I do sympathise with the mayor in regards to your question. It is true. It is frustrating. It burns me putting a number beside certain parties' names. None of those parties are here tonight, though, so rest assured. But I do understand the frustration. But look, the system works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, again, it has to be looked at.
Can somebody pass the microphone to Karen?
You can actually have the highest number of primary votes out of a field of candidates and still be undone by preferential voting. So just make that clear. Popular vote does not count with CPV in all circumstances.
It does. It just means the popular vote went against you.
I'll leave that there.
It means you've been forced to number every single box.
I think
Vote
that's what everyone's
works.
saying.
It has worked, as Andrew has said, has worked before, particularly when you don't know half the candidates on your ballot paper. And by the way, that is about 80% of the case in most elections at all three levels of government.
Thank you. Lyle?
Thanks very much, Karen. And your question also went to the attitude towards local government from the high levels. I had the privilege of serving for 6.5 years on the Toowoomba City Council, and I'm passionate about local government and local democracy. In regard to preferential voting, I think the problem is that the major parties, both Labor and Liberal, and it's been conceded tonight, and Andrew, was good enough to concede that, a coalition government mucked around with the Senate voting system as well. Labor have done it at a state level, and this is the trouble. The major parties have been gaming the system, chopping and changing, preying on the understandable ignorance of most of us about how the political process works and how complex voting systems operate, and that is the problem, I think. I think preferential voting can be fair if people understand how it works. And yes, you number every box, but if you know what you're doing with your preferences, and everyone does, then that can be a fair system. Optional first past the post or optional preferential voting can also be fair. But the thing is, we need to be consistent, and we have different systems now at different levels of government, and we've got a different system at this federal election between the Green ballot paper and the Senate ballot paper. So it's compulsory preferential voting in the House of Reps, where Andrew is standing, and it's optional preferential voting in the Senate. Now, we're not allowed to tell people that.
No, it's not.
A vote won will be counted as a valid vote. Now, we're not allowed to tell people
Just one
that
second.
on our...
Brandon, you're the lawyer. Can you clarify that, please?
You can clarify when I'm finished. But with respect, Mr. Adjudicator, we have to legally say on our ballot paper, vote 1, then number 2 to 6. But the system is different between 2 houses of government at one election, and that's just confusing for the Australian people, and it's done because the major parties are trying to keep a lock on power, and I don't think that's acceptable.
Okay, Brandon. This will be a final comment.
Vote 1 to 6 above the line for the Senate. Vote 1 to 12 below the line for the Senate.
There's a provision in the Act that allows you to vote 1 above the line.
Yeah, we can't say we're allowed to, but we can say that if the AEC finds ballot papers with just a 1 under there, they'll consider that a clear intention of voting.
Which I think basically outlines the fact that the system is clear as mud.